Donald Winnicott. Our discussion today will continue with Donald Winnicott, a very important thinker in the arena of psychoanalysis. We have covered till now three important thinkers: Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and Melanie Klein. In fact, four: Wilfred Bion. And today we cover the fifth important thinker in psychoanalysis who has created a school of his own in psychoanalysis, Donald Winnicott. Let's take up questions in the FAQ format as given in the book. Question 1. Who was Donald Winnicott? Donald Winnicott was a British psychoanalyst. The British psychoanalytic movement at that time was divided between two camps: the Freudian camp and the Kleinian camp. The Freudian camp was led by Freud's daughter Anna Freud, and Kleinian camp was led by Melanie Klein, and there were intense conflicts, both good and not good, conceptual and personal, between the two camps. And in that politics of psychoanalysis, Donald Winnicott stood as an independent person, judging issues on their merit without considering leaning politically in favor of any of the camps. So he became the leading figure of the independent group, and his school even today is called the Independent School. How did However, the independent school now has its own fanaticism in some ways, but the foundation of the independent school is on the premise of responding and engaging with issues of psychoanalysis on merit and not on the basis of the political affiliations. How did Winnicott come to psychoanalysis? Winnicott was trained primarily as a pediatrician, and in the course of treating children, infants, neonatals and infants, and children also, he slowly got interested in the mind of the children. And slowly he started taking more interest in psychoanalysis. And then he shifted from pediatrics to psychoanalysis. And during this journey of Winnicott, he wrote some papers, and this got published later as collected papers titled Through Pediatrics to Psychoanalysis. It's almost like saying from pediatrics to psychoanalysis. Three, what school did he create in psychoanalysis? He created what is called the independent school, which would judge all issues on their merit without going into any of the camps. He was very original in his approach, and often he experimented with ideas, with concepts and techniques which others would not dare to do. Winnicott was, if we look at all the psychoanalytic thinkers, Winnicott was among one of the healthiest at a personal level of the psychoanalytic thinkers. When we read Winnicott, we get this feeling of somebody giving a sage counsel, a balanced, dispassionate, but a positive and happy view of life. So Winnicott comes across with the sagacity of a sage and the nobility and the positivity of a deeply curious and a happy person, one of the healthiest among the founders of schools in psychoanalysis. We don't see the kind of pathology at the personal level that we see in case of Freud and Jung, even in case of Klein, beyond, of course. That kind of pathology we don't see at a personal level in Winnicott. Comes across as somebody who has worked through his difficulties and come to a position of a sage wisdom. Winnicott also was very experimental and very bold. There is an anecdote, I'm not sure if it is true, remains to be checked, but there is an anecdote very popular that Winnicott once took a patient home for a few days, which by classical psychoanalytic conventions is like a scandal, but Winnicott was bold enough to do it. Similarly, he brought concepts into psychoanalysis very boldly, very positively, and similarly created a technique also with very bold and original innovations. And many of his things are on the healthier side of life, in contrast to Freud and Klein and beyond, who are dealing with the depth of pathology, that part of life. What were his what were his major conceptual contributions to psychoanalysis? He contributed many original ideas and originality in technique, not to mention an independent school. Some of his ideas, which have become mainstream now, are ideas of good enough mothering, the holding environment, the true and false self, going on being, unorganization and disorganization or disintegration, transitional object, transitional space, creativity, capacity to be alone, wonder, the concept of play, and the concept of being alive. For Winnicott, aliveness, playfulness, happiness, and the capacity to be alone in bliss, these were very, very important goals of psychotherapy. And therefore, the goals were not just cessation of pathology, but to enter into and be in a state of play, happiness, wonder, and develop the capacity to be alone. And this capacity to be alone differentiates Winnicott from most of the Western psychoanalytic thinkers, where being alone is almost seen as pathological, as inviting pathological loneliness because one is not able to engage in good object relations. So Western psychotherapy essentially goes only in two types of positions in relation to the object: good object relations, bad object relations. Sorry, three: good object relations, bad object relations, and object relation avoidance. The fourth position of object freedom, which is the goal of Hindu spirituality, was brought into psychoanalysis, where we go beyond good object relations and we attain freedom from object and object relations without any pathology or any diminution of our happiness or productivity or health. Winnicott brought that Eastern idea into psychoanalysis in his very famous paper, Capacity to be Alone. And of course, this is capacity to be alone in bliss. So bliss became a respectable concept in psychoanalysis with Winnicott. Six, what is good enough mothering? Winnicott gives central importance to a good enough mothering in childhood as the basis for good health. Winnicott believes, and he found it from analysis of adults, that not having good enough mothering in childhood, usually, in most cases, as a rule, exceptions apart, as a rule, is at the base of a healthy psychological self or a sick psychological self. In that sense, Winnicott gives far more importance, relatively speaking, to environment than to the intrapsychic reality or the constitution. Contrast to Jung and Klein, who give more importance to the intrapsychic structure and functioning compared to the environment. Winnicott gives more significance, relatively speaking, to the environment. Kohut also gives similarly more significance to the environment. Winnicott was clear that it's impossible to be the ideal mother. He was also clear that an ideal mother also is not an ideal experience for the child to have from a psychological health standpoint. So Winnicott felt and believed that the best to happen to a child is to have a good enough mother and experience good enough mothering with optimum frustration. So the mother is neither all good nor all bad. She is slightly on the positive side. We are looking at 70% good mother, 80% good mother. We are not looking beyond that and below this. That is the good enough mother of Winnicott. Mother that gives gratification most of the time and occasionally introduces the child to frustration, which Winnicott calls optimum frustration, which is also important for good psychological health. Winnicott goes on to say, even in case of psychosis, the core is lack of good enough mothering in the childhood. For Winnicott, therefore, not only was good enough mothering the central point of psychological health, Winnicott saw even in early children, when good enough mothering was not in practice, children started showing pathological signs even as early as infancy or early childhood or late childhood. 7. What is true self and the false self? Winnicott discovered and said that a normal child lives out his childhood and age appropriate slowly graduates into maturity. It's like at a particular point, a child is infatuated with toys, lives it out completely, and slowly and naturally outgrows his liking for toys. Similarly, we outgrow our childhood after having lived it and relished it to our content. However, for some reasons, be it related to the parents or socioeconomic conditions, if a child is not able to live out fully his childhood to his content, and he is forced to act mature before age, he prematurely matures. And what happens there is the child does not organically move into maturity. Rather, the child is not fully lived and he jumps to maturity. So, in a usual sense, the child slowly matures, graduates, the child slowly graduates into maturity. If this is the child and this is the mature front, the child organically grows into maturity and becomes one organic whole. Whereas, if a child has not lived his childhood completely and is prematurely forced into maturity, both of them are there. And this then, the premature mature front becomes the false self, which the child puts up to deal with the world for survival and avoidance of pain and enhancement of pleasure. But this has not been completely lived out. So there is a disconnect, and the two of them are coexisting together. They are not organically, this has not organically grown into this. The two of them are there together. And one feels alienated from one's core because this one is operating out of this false self, and the true self has yet to be lived out. And one feels that one is located in the false self, a premature, mature false self. And this false self is alienated from the true self. Winnicott felt discovery of the true self, integration of the true self into the false self, and the false self into the true self, the integration of the two, and the capability to live out the true self is very necessary for good health. And for many people, this was the cure. So for one group of his patients, the cure was to identify that they are living out from a false self, the sense of emptiness, the sense of alienation, the sense of not being rooted. The feet are not touching the ground, not feeling an organic whole inside of oneself, deprived and devoid of the root from where positivity, energy, and enterprise can flow. These complaints required, according to Winnicott, for that group of clients, identification that they are living out of the false self, identification that there is a true self inside, deeply buried, shedding off of the false self and bringing the true self in the front and living it out. This living out of the true self and integration of the two schizoidly kept self into one, because one can never live out one's true self completely. There has to be some false self, but one has to be conscious in operating that false self. So the integration of the two by studying much of the false self and some part of it is integrated into the true self. The true self comes into the front, integrates it, and one is able to live out one's true self to the extent possible. And then there is no schism between the two selves, they are together. And one is primarily living out of one's true self. This, according to Winnicott, was the cure for a very large group of patients coming to him. Once one is in touch with the true self, then springs of joy, naturalness, play, and aliveness are to be found. It is there that the river of life flows. I should say the river of aliveness flows. 8. What is going on being? Child as it is growing up, as it starts moving, it gets absorbed in play and developmental activities. And Winnicott used to say that the mother has to be present but not intruding into the child's play or developmental activities or exploration. This being present but not intruding is what Winnicott said the child experiences a state of going on being without being intruded. And this uninterrupted going on being in the secure presence of the mother or secure access to the mother is very important according to Winnicott. Mother does not have to be absent, otherwise it is felt like abandonment, but mother has to be present and non-intruding. What the child does is, first the child plays in the presence of the mother, looks at the mother if she is going to intrude or not, and if she is not intruding, the child feels confident to experience and grow with going on being. Slowly, the child starts going slightly away from the mother, but keeping the mother in the line of sight. Third stage, child goes outside of line of sight, but occasionally comes to check if the mother is still there, to see if the secure base is still present. And he is connected to the secure base psychologically, not physically by sight. And over a period of time, he internalizes the secure base. And then, even if the mother is not present, he does not feel abandoned. He feels safe. Across this developmental process of the child, the going on being has to be experienced first near to the mother, then away from the mother but in the line of sight, then occasionally checking the secure base, and then having internalized the secure base, experience it even while alone. Hyperanxious or hyperactive parents or attacking parents intrude too much and they disturb the going on being. The going on being is very necessary in Winnicott's view to experience and internalize peace, calm, silence, self-assurance, feeling free to self-express, feeling alive, creativity, wonder, and bliss in this state of going on being. It's also a very productive state. 9. What is it to be alive? For Winnicott, to be alive is not only to survive, but to really feel alive, which means to be playful, happy, joyful, productive, blissful in one's own company, having the capacity to be alone, and to be loving. And this would happen the more one is in touch with one's true self. With getting in touch with the true self and a few other developmental processes being done, one can get into a state of being happy, curious, creative, playful, and being alive. For Winnicott, these were some of the core goals of therapy and psychoanalysis, and also for individual for living. 10. What is organizing, unorganizing, and disintegration or disorganizing? Disintegration, some also refer to as disorganizing. Winnicott talks about 3 states. State 1, when the ego is in the foreground, in the front, controlling everything, and we are in a state of rational cognition. This is the state of organizing. We can also call it ego front state. The second is unorganizing, where the ego is intact, in control, but it deactivates itself partially, recedes into the background, and allows fantasy to play out, creativity to play out, curiosity and aliveness to play out. Directed to a purpose, of course, given by the ego. But once the purpose is given, the ego takes a backseat and allows the creative process to come forth, and the hold of rationality and the whole hold of the classical problem solving process is reduced. And this allows the creative process to happen. This is ego taking a backseat without any ego disintegration. Ego recedes, partly deactivates its control over the psychic system, but is still intact and completely in control, and is allowing a purposeful freedom from the ego, called unorganizing of the ego. And the third state, which is a pathological state, we got called the state of disorganization of the ego or disintegration of the ego, where the ego disintegrates and a pathological situation arises. Organizing is the state of normal functioning. Unorganizing is a state of highly creative functioning, which we should encourage. And disorganizing or disintegration is a pathological process which we should overcome and avoid. These three states happen in adulthood. And of course, the goal is to generally be in a state of organizing or ego front state, on demand when necessary, and at least a few hours a day, if not more, be in a state of unorganizing or creative state or ego back state, and avoid ego disintegration state. That is the goal in terms of these three concepts in the adult life. In child life, however, all the three happen for the first time very strongly when the ego is being created. Because the ego just does not happen as an event. In early life, the ego gets organized and unorganized and disorganized, and it takes quite some time before a stable, organized ego comes into being. And the ego formation process often is accompanied by all the three processes, that there is organizing for some time, unorganizing for some time, disorganizing or disintegration for some time. And over a period of time, slowly a stable ego and a stable state of organization comes into being. And later, ego learns how to go into the state of unorganizing for higher productivity, higher aliveness, higher curiosity, and fulfilling higher goals, higher than those that can be fulfilled in the state of organizing. And this integration, of course, happens in a pathological state because of certain difficulties inside or outside or both. In Winnicott's view, those who have received good enough mothering and who are in touch with their true self, who had considerable amount of empathy, usually are able to be in a state of organizing or state of ego front organized state, go into the state of unorganizing when needed, and rarely are in a state of disintegration. Whereas Those without early life good enough mothering, feelings of the state of disorganization or disintegration happens partially or fully, spontaneously or under stress, and with that associated feelings of dread, terror, anxiety, helplessness, humiliation, pain, aggression, they arise. 11. Did Winnicott work with children? Extensively. Winnicott actually moved from working with infants as a pediatrist to psychoanalyst. So his work, like Klein, directly used to be with children, with infants. And Winnicott also extensively worked with street children, with delinquent children. And he felt occasionally that delinquency was actually a call for a disciplining superego, which was missed by the child. He developed two important games while working with children, the game of squiggle and the game of spatula. 12. What is the game of spatula? Winnicott used to keep a spatula on his table, and infants who would enter his consulting room would see it, and most of the time a sequence would take place. The child would first look at it with wonder, after some moments try to grab it, look at it, play with it, often play it, put it in the mouth or try to do it, and then throw it. After throwing it, they would again ask for it. And this, Winnicott felt, was the behavior of a normal baby. Infants who did not have good enough mothering, in his opinion, had developed problems very early in life, even in infancy, and they were hesitant to reach out to spatula and play with it. And the game of spatula gave Winnicott a window into the psyche of the infants. It was like a play therapy done with spatula. 13. What is a transitional object? Winnicott discovered that when the child slowly separates from the mother at the age of 3 to 4, in some cases even earlier, the child is not able to give up the mother directly. So first, the child, in the process of separating from the mother, separates with a vicarious symbolic object that represents the mother. So the child removes part of his attachment and dependence on the mother and puts it on an object that serves as a substitute of the mother or the breast. That object Winnicott calls as the transitional object. Quite often it is a teddy bear or some garment of the mother or a blanket, and the child finds safety, security, belongingness, and reverie being with this object. And after some time, the child is able to give up this object. And therefore, this object serves a transitional purpose that for some time, as the child is separating from the mother or the breast, child attaches to this object, takes this to be a substitute of the mother or the breast, relates to it, and then as the child is able to grow and give up the relation with this object, the child gives away the transitional object. This is how a healthy child grows up. In case of difficult children, however, the separation from the mother or the attachment to the mother is not healthy. And therefore, these children are not able to give up the transitional object like healthy children can. So either The disturbed children find it difficult to move to a transitional object or to give up the transitional object. More often than not, they are not able to give up transitional object age appropriate. Some children live with the transitional object as late as puberty. Some even live in the adult life with a transitional object. They are never able to give up the transitional object because the separation from the mother was traumatic. It was not gradual. If the gradual separation does not happen, then it is not a separation, it is not a natural separation, it is experienced as abandonment and severe object loss. In such cases, the transitional object becomes almost like a permanent object. One of the goals of therapy for this group of clients is to help them give up the transitional object, and some are just not able to. And there, the therapy has to accept the limitations where, as Lacan says, symptom cannot be completely cured. The symptom converts into a symptom. Lacan rightly says that everything cannot be cured, and often therapy has to accept the limitations that at best the symptom can be converted into a symptom, but a cure cannot be found. This happens in case of some transitional objects also, but I would say transitional object obsession, so to say, or let me say not obsession, but transitional object fixation. However, in most cases, one is able to move past the transitional object with right internalization of the good object in therapy. 14. What does the child want the mother to do to help him develop as a healthy child? What is Winnicott's? This is a question of what is Winnicott's prescription for raising an emotionally healthy individual. The child wants the mother to provide him with good enough mothering. What is good enough mothering? Let us deconstruct it. One, mother should be emotionally and physically present for the child. Two, mother should take notice and be appreciative of the child and provide the right mirroring. Three, mother should allow the child going on being while being in the line of sight and provide him with a secure base. D, mother should provide a good holding environment. And by that, Winnicott means what Bion would call an active containment. That the mother should not only be a good container to contain difficult emotions of the child, not to pay back the child in his own coin. If the child is aggressive, the mother does not pay back the aggression with aggression, but the mother holds the aggression, that is passive containment. And not only that, mother gives back the smile even as the child is beating the mother. Winnicott says the child also should experience that he can exploit the mother, and the mother willingly and lovingly allows the child a reasonable exploitative experience. And this is what Winnicott calls a good holding environment. And the mother also allows the child to experience her own capacity to be alone, that she can be alone and blissful, happy, playful, alive, and loving. This, if the child experiences, he experiences what Winnicott capsules in one phrase, good enough mothering. Good enough mothering has all these constituents. And this becomes the core of good health of the child. 15. Did Winnicott ever break the boundaries of therapy? Yes, many times. Winnicott was very original and very practical. He was not held back by conventions when necessary. Once it is said he took a patient home, which would be nothing less than a scandal in psychoanalysis. Good part was Winnicott always broke boundaries, always broke conventions for a good enough reason in the interest of the client. And therefore, he was never accused of any misdoing, either on the personal front or financial front or the romantic front. So he crossed boundaries, but he never crossed the wrong boundaries. 16. In which countries Winnicott is popular in terms of his school? Winnicott is popular in UK, some parts of Europe, in India, northern part of India, some locations in United States, especially the western part of United States. 17. How does Winnicott look at psychosis? Winnicott looks at psychosis, and the root cause Winnicott finds of psychosis is lack of good enough mothering, where the chaos of the inner world cannot be regulated in absence of a strong ego, which could not be organized cohesively enough in absence of good enough mothering. Does good enough mothering also lead to internalization of a good, reliable, stable object? As Klein says, of course, yes. It is not an or situation, it is an and situation. Winnicott's good enough mothering Winnicott describes good enough mothering in more macro terms. Klein describes it in a more intrapsychic elemental terms, more micro terms, not elemental, but micro terms, to say that presence of a good mother leads to internalization of a good, reliable, stable object, which of course happens in process terms in Winnicott's good enough mothering process. 18. What does Winnicott say on the holding environment? Winnicott gives a lot of importance to the holding environment. And this holding, as we discussed, is more than just beyond passive containment, more than beyond active containment. It is active containment plus good mirroring plus capacity to be alone, allowing that to be internalized, plus providing a good secure base, plus providing a going on being. So the holding environment provides, as we discussed a few moments back, passive containment, active containment, good mirroring, going on being, secure base, love, and a genuine, authentic display of capacity to be alone by the mother, which the child can internalize. In therapy, a very good thing that the therapist can do for the client is to provide a good holding environment. This is one of the central concerns of Winnicott, to provide a good holding environment and good enough mothering. Of course, providing a good holding environment is a part of good enough mothering in the therapy room, so that the arrested developmental process can restart. 19. What does Winnicott say on antisocial tendencies? For Winnicott, antisocial tendency delinquency is a cry for help of individuals who did not have a stable, consistent anchoring in the family. The delinquent was looking for a holding environment, and delinquency in a way is a cry for good holding environment and a strong superego. An anchor who can guide and who can hold. Often there is a search of parent with a good superego, and the superego of the child, the delinquent, is desperate to complete its own development which has been arrested. It's essentially a cry for the good parent and the ideal parent. This delinquency, which is an arrest, is quite different from antisocial tendencies which are seen rooted in psychopathy, which are seen rooted in perversion or rage. That is a separate group of people, but a large group among the delinquents is the group which is crying out for a good parent and a good superego. 20. What is play for Winnicott? For Winnicott, play happens in the transitional space, which is neither reality nor fantasy. It is in that space that the play happens, and the transitional space is also in the therapy room. That in the space between the client and the therapist, in the space between the id and the ego, in the space between the superego and the id, in these transitional spaces, development happens, play happens. In Jung's words, alchemy happens. Play is not something limited to children. All our lives we play. The content of play and the objective of play, of course, changes with age. So play is found in relatedness, in sports, in play of words, in play of creativity, in the profession, and also in the therapy room. Play is everywhere. Good play happens in good conditions of health, and that helps us experience aliveness, happiness. And the ideal metaphor is being the play of life. It's an ideal metaphor for the journey of life. In therapy room, different types of play happen, and different types of play have to be differently directed and governed and managed for optimum results. The same play may not work for all clients. Given the client, a designed play has to be put into play. 21. What is it to be real? For Winnicott to be able to get over the false self and live out from the true self is to be real. And when one is there, one is alive, natural, playful, creative, capable of spontaneity, capable of wonder, capable of being alone in bliss. And one is in touch with a great source of energy inside, initiative inside, enterprise inside. One feels rounded, complete, and one feels one's feet are touching the ground. There is no sense of inward alienation. One feels rooted and organically fused into a complete whole. Authenticity, therefore, is the key. And this also is one of the core areas of core goals of Winnicott's therapy. What was Winnicott's famous personal statement? He gave many statements which became very popular. One was, he reflected upon his childhood where his mother was severely depressed and Winnicott was busy all the time trying to cheer her up and to make sure she does not get into anything suicidal. So he wrote famously, he said, to keep her alive became my living. And this has two meanings. To keep her alive is to ensure she survives. And second, ensure she is happy. And this practice probably helped Winnicott do the same thing for many of his patients. And it is from there, perhaps, that his central concern for being alive and playful may have developed. Caretakers who have to look after mentally ill patients for a long time often feel the same way. Winnicott also used to say a very famous statement, "Tell me what you fear and I will tell you what has happened to you." Golden words, a word of wisdom is packed into that statement. 23. Was Winnicott a happy and healthy person? Yes. He had severe difficulties in childhood, but he seems to have overcome much of it. If we look at all the founders of psychoanalytic schools, Winnicott comes across as one of the most healthy and happy at the personal level. Of course, there's nothing like an innocent interest in psychoanalysis. So we don't know at a personal level, some light pathology, mild pathology may have continued because he did go for psychoanalysis twice with analysts of different schools, I believe, if I'm not wrong. However, relatively speaking, and even in absolute terms, not only relatively, but even in absolute terms, he was among one of the most healthy, happy, and alive uh, founders of schools of psychoanalysis. He took his own belief in being alive, curious, playful, in developing capacity to be alone, to be alive and loving. He took all of this seriously and he implemented what he said. He lived his words. 24. Who are the thinkers who have taken forward his work? Adam Phillips, Michael Jacobs, Michael Egan. They are some of the major contributors to Winnicottian thinking. There are many more, but to dive deeper, one can start with the three. 25. What are the major resources to access on Winnicott? Winnicott is very lucid and good to read, and you get the flavor of somebody who has the sagacity, the maturity, and the sageness of a sage and a happy sage. Unlike Freud, Jung, Uhud, and beyond, Winnicott is not difficult to read. Winnicott is easy to read. So I would say straight away go to Winnicott, read him directly. If you find it difficult, then start with uh, Adam Phillips, Winnicott by Adam Phillips, or D.W. Winnicott by Michael Jacobs, and then go to Winnicott. But usually it's not necessary. You can directly go. But if you find it difficult, go through these two authors and then take to Winnicott in the original. Having done that, one can move to research papers on Winnicott. Winnicott admirers have also created some very interesting and profound videos on YouTube. We end the chapter on Winnicott with a very popular statement from Winnicott. I can't get enough of it, no matter how many times I repeat it. There is a world of wisdom packed into this statement. Statement is, tell me what you fear, and I will tell you what has happened to you. Donald Winnicott. Thank you.